What made you decide to be an advocacy filmmaker?
I think my path to human rights advocacy started 6 years ago, and this project with the Budjang was really close to home because I'm also from Zamboanga City, and it was and for many years we've been lobbying the anti-discrimination ordinance in the city because it's hard to just wait for the national social equality bill. So we were uh, lobbying for the anti-discrimination ordinance, and it was like a long road and long process for us to do it. So we decided to use the form of the documentary to empower and to gather more support to lobby, to effectively lobby the anti-discrimination ordinance for Zamboanga City. And I have also the organization, which is Mujer in Zamboanga, where we've been doing a lot of legal assistance, psychosocial activities, and health programs for the abused LGBT and LGBT sector in Zamboanga City. It is very close to home, and I've been uh, living as well in Metro Manila. There are still a lot of struggles coming from the transgender community that they are having a hard time getting hired by a government, by private sector. But what more if you are living in a very conservative and very fundamentalist barangay in some part of Mindanao. So that's what sparks me in pushing for this angle.
So, and it was also mentioned earlier, no, na you're living in Mindanao, no, in Zamboanga City, and then I introduced you as Rhadem Musawah, and when they saw the credits, no, it's Rhadem Kamlian Morados. No, can you explain yung change of your name?
It's quite different because both on my maternal and paternal side still do not agree with my advocacy. And every time I do my pride events in Mindanao, when I do my LGBT film and my other LGBT programs, uh, they are not comfortable that the entire family are being associated with it. So I decided to change my family name into Musawa, which is equality in Arabic. Uh, to sort of like in some way to, well, not really to please my family, but just to avoid further issues with them and conflict with my family, while at the same time still promoting my advocacy. So I think that's the thing because I organized few pride events in Mindanao and I was called out, and there was an incident 2 years ago where I being hunted by the fundamentalist group in Zamboanga and also in Basilan and also in Marawi. So my family don't want to get in trouble because of what I do. So this also so that's why I decided to change it into Musawa and not to include the Kamlian Morales family to my sort of like public name. So parang nagka-screen name na ako at some point. But I kept my real name, my
Those
first name. Yeah.
who's not familiar, no, for those who are not familiar, no, with for those who are not familiar with the culture, no, and the religion, no. So how would you explain to them yung conflict between being a Muslim and a member of the LGBTQ community?
There are a lot of intersecting marginalization when it comes to being an indigenous Moro and at the same time member of the LGBT community. So those are the struggles being faced by an LGBT Moro, even if they are within the Moro region or outside the Moro region. Uh, the Christian community are more tolerating now, but acceptance is still not there because I think when you say acceptance, it reflects to the national law. So while there is still while the Soji Equality Bill is not yet approved in Congress, so it is safe to say that acceptance is not yet fully delivered within the Christian region or the non-Muslims. So what more in the situation with the Bangsamoro? However, there are some efforts of the Bangsamoro officials that they are trying to uh, tolerate the existence of the LGBT Moro with some restraints and limitations. So for now, we're trying to lobby extensive human rights policy in Bangsamoro, and hopefully we'll be successful with that. So it's a long process, but we're still doing it. I mean, everything is a process. Rome were not made in one day, so I believe that hopefully in the near future, we will be able to just like in Zamboanga City, we will be successful in Bangsamoro to provide a more or strengthening the protection for the gender marginalized groups.
Since you already mentioned no tolerance no and acceptance, it was discussed no in the documentary earlier in Budjang no that some religious leaders no just tolerate no members of the community, and parang nandun din sa ano doon sa documentary on Budjang no that the older man no parang is some sort of ano lang tolerating but not exactly no accepting Budjang. Aside from discussing no the conditions of the members of the LGBTQ community, you're also telling the story of the approval of the ordinance in Zamboanga City.
Yeah. Uh, so technically, originally, the intention of Bujang was to lobby for the approval of the anti-discrimination ordinance in Zamboanga City. However, pandemic happened, so there was a delay in the releasing of the film. But because of our production with the film, and a lot of people was made aware of what's happening and the intention of the film, I think a lot of communities and allies in Zamboanga City were empowered to really push more and do a lot of effort for the anti-discrimination ordinance. So when the anti-discrimination ordinance was approved late October last year, the intention of Bujang shifted to national instead of only for Zamboanga City. Uh, so tapos now, after launching it, the intention again and the goal shifted to international as well. Uh, so Bujang is the only Southeast Asian film that will be screened in Denmark for the World Pride. So I take really a strong pride from it that we will have a representation of Southeast Asian culture, and at the same time the struggles, the human rights struggles in Mindanao in the international arena. Uh, so the process now with the anti-discrimination ordinance in Zamboanga City, we are now in the process of drafting the implementation of the ordinance to the city of Zamboanga City, and that's what we are what makes us busy now, because after the approval of the ordinance, we need to create the implementation and regulations of the ordinances to be implemented further and effectively in the city. So hopefully, the IRR will be approved in the next few months. So we will start seeing a lot of inclusive programs within the city of Zamboanga.
For you, parang ano sabi mo nga walang choice no na how would you explain that further no in the context of the family?
About the film, about the my journey in becoming a filmmaker.
Taking up international relations no at Xavier
Oh, oh
University.
yeah, because I was intended. My family wanted me to become a lawyer, so my international relation was a preparatory for law.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but after I graduated international relation, that was the time that I also came out, and my family cut the financial pipeline, and I was temporarily disowned for 5 years. That's the reason why I moved to Metro Manila, uh, because I felt like I was already kicked out in the family, in the community. So I started my real TV and film career when I was already in Manila, and I think I was lucky that I was able to land a job at ABS-CBN and also at TV5, and that gave me as well the advantage on knowing the diversity within the TV and the film industry and the various type of stories that we can share to the people, and it also empowers me in knowing and identifying uh, different lenses that I can use in pursuing my advocacies. So then after that, I started doing a lot of involvement with some NGOs and traveling around the Philippines and traveling around the world as well, because I feel like we have more to discover, and at the same time we have more to share and to echo uh, in the world, not just the Philippine culture, but also the culture outside our boundaries.
Which came first, your work in the TV station or you being chosen as one of the United Nations SDG 10 na ano ba 'yun? Advocates.
Uh, I was my first job aside from that family business, because I'm not taking that as first job because that was technically family business. You can actually just not do anything with it. So my first real job is with ABS-CBN. So I was an assistant the director at the time. Then I moved to TV5. And after that, I moved to Bangkok.
Mm. For
Then after my Bangkok job, I went back to the Philippines. Then I started doing community immersion. Then that was the time that I got introduced with United Nations, and they see a lot of my programs. Then I started doing my freelancing, my docu filmmaking. Budjang was my fifth documentary film. I had the documentary film in the past. One with the title was Hugo, about the story about the artifacts in Cordillera region, and the other one was about the mining industries. Then after that was the Lupah Sug, then In Paglayag, then the Budjang.
okay. Ayan. And aside from the yung um United Nations, no, you're also involved in other advocacies, no. I saw your face, no, in a poster of AIDS education. Tama ba 'yan?
Oh, because I'm part of the Red Whistle organization, so we mostly we do a lot of health programs for, well, not just focus on the LGBT, but also with the straight community as well, in promoting and prevention of HIV and AIDS in the Philippines as well. Uh, so aside from that, I was also part of the Mindanao Pride, and I was also an alumni of the Changemaker program of the Thomson Reuters Foundation in London. Uh, there's a lot of things, because I felt kasi na the more I expose myself to a lot of issues, the more I will be able to effectively send the message through my film. So I think that was my strategy to fully immerse myself, so that I will be able to share more story, not just a story, because we all have different lenses and we have personal biases lenses, and sometimes it does affect. It reflects in our documentaries or videos that we make. No, So in order for me to address those issues, I need to expose myself to a lot of other issues and a lot of cultures and communities and various lenses for me to be able to balance of the balance of my style of storytelling.
Okay. And then so from then on, no, you got grants, no? Kasi maybe some students are also um thinking about, no, pursuing this path, no, of after graduation, no. So after they graduate from film school, no, yung being an activist, no, slash advocacy filmmaker, no. How do you get grants, or how do you sustain, no, your ano ba, should I call it a career as a filmmaker?
Oh, well, most of my funders are international organization. Uh, that's one of the challenging part here in the Philippines because the interest on documentary is not as big as the interest towards fiction film. And at the same time, there are not so many organizations locally and also producers in the Philippines that fund documentaries, especially those kind of topics that are still taboos. For example, the LGBT morals. So what I did is that I was reaching out to a lot of embassies, for example, the British Embassy, the Czech Republic, the French, the US. I constantly pitch out to them, and at the same time, I approach a lot of international organizations for grants because there are a lot of international organizations in the US and also in Europe that provide grants for documentaries that talks about issues that they prioritize for that year. So it's just a matter of finding your niche and finding the advocacy that you want to fight for and look for organization internationally and inquire to this organization if they have certain grants and then apply for that grants. Actually, there are a lot of updates from international organizations on various grants. For example, issues on poverty, issues on lives below the ocean, and mga industrial advocacy. So those are the type of organization that you can tap and present to them your idea and offer them as pitch to them like what you call it, well, not business proposal, but your film proposal to them, your idea, and tell them what is the importance of shifting towards films and effectively spreading the awareness for these types of advocacy. So my exposure in a lot of NGOs here in the Philippines have prepared me in pitching a lot of film projects to these international embassies, governments, and also international NGOs. So that's what I'm saying, that exposure to the communities, to your advocacies, will eventually help you out in how you would navigate and sort of like get a higher approval in pitching grants with the international government or international NGOs.
Mm-hmm.
So yun.
And now you're working on another documentary, right?
Oh, yeah, I'm working on another documentary about indigenous in Tawi-Tawi. So that's what I'm working on this year, despite the pandemic. But hopefully we will be able to finish it later this year and hopefully to launch it by next year.
Mm-hmm. And then I remember
So
meeting you
yeah,
at the Subangan Film
Subangan, yes, yes,
of the Teach Peace,
build
Build
peace
Peace
movement, yeah.
movement. How did you get involved, no, in the TB, ano yan? Teach Peace,
Yes,
TPBP, Teach Peace.
because Uh, this process, because my uncle is a member of the OPAP, the Presidential Peace Process uh, institution as well, and my family is involved in the peace process as well. Uh, and growing up in my younger years, I grew up in the environment wherein there's always bombing happening, killing, and a lot of type of violence uh, all over the region. So promoting and helping out with the peace process has been one of my core goals for Mindanao. So that's why I got involved with the Teach Peace, Build Peace movement. So we've been doing a lot of peace process programs in the conflict region, for example, in Marawi, in Maguindanao, in Sulu. Uh, one of my, well, not really exciting, but one of my revealing experience with Teach Peace is when we were in the middle of the ground zero and helping in the rescue operation during the Marawi siege. That was my first involvement in the actual ground zero while everything is shaking and there's a lot of uh, stray bullets and seeing a lot of children that get traumatized from that siege. So we did a lot of psychosocial activities for that, and there is really I realized that there's really importance in coming together in helping out in the peace process, because if we're not going to help out this community, they cannot help themselves. So that's one of my advocacy aside from the gender marginalized group. It's with gender marginalized group, with the history, culture, and the peace process, because those are the elements that is strongly not really lacking, but strongly surrounding and affecting the progress of Mindanao.
Since
So
since you mentioned,
it's like bringing back to my home island, the Mindanao.
mm, since you also mentioned that, no, last year, no, you were part of the first Bangsamoro Film Festival. So
Oh
you
yeah,
served as
yes, I was the festival director of Bangsamoro Short Film Festival. That was an event that I pitched out to the Czech Republic Embassy, and that was approved by the Bangsamoro government. And yeah, it was a challenge. It was challenging because it was done online. So it was an online film festival because of the pandemic. So we need, we need to shift online. But it was also a good avenue for the youth Moro to strengthen their story storytelling skills despite the pandemic, and for them to be an echo chamber of what is happening on the ground in the conflict region in Bangsamoro as well. So I think that was a really good impact. Then now I got approached by the Belgium embassy, so they wanted to strengthen the storytelling skills of the. So we might do that project later this year. But this time it will not be solely on the film, but it will be on the photojournalism, the art, painting, because there is a cultural when it comes to art kasi, I don't know if I think some of you have noticed it's we have traditional art, we have traditional Moro arts, but we don't really have so much uh modern arts or contemporary arts coming from the youth. So that's what we're doing to empower the youth on the storytelling through art in any type of art. So we wanted to do that. It will be psychosocial in Bangsamoro, and in order to break that is to present various platform where youths can express themselves and can tell story without speaking, but tell that story through their arts.
The visual through the visual medium.
Yes,
So
the vision. Yes.
since you're an activist, advocacy filmmaker, no? So you use your documentaries, no, to encourage, provoke discussion, no? What has been the worst criticism or experience that you had, no, in showing your documentaries to a public audience?
I think the worst part is most of these gender topics documentary that I did. Uh, it's hard for me to get a screening in Bangsamoro. So those are the challenges. Uh, and the constant threat from the fundamentalists and the religious extremists as well in Mindanao. Uh, so those are the constant challenges of making this film, because technically we are making this film so that you would be able to show it locally, especially in Mindanao. Then suddenly you can only show it to one or two city, because the rest of the towns and the rest of the region prevents it from being screened. So those are the challenges. So what's happening now is that I only screen it outside of Mindanao. I screen it all over the world, but not in Sulu, not in Basila, not in Tawi-Tawi, not in Maguindanao, not in Marawi, which was intended for those towns. So those are the challenging, because how would you be able to uh, encourage more people to become an ally, and how would you encourage more LGBT Moro to speak up if they cannot see the film? But we do organize like a private screening, as long as we don't publicly announce it. But of course, the private screening will be too limited, and those are the challenges, and the constant possibility of danger as well, of the risk on the safety. Actually, I have a pending case in the United Nations Human Rights Council, because the extremist group in Sulu and Tawe-Tawe uh, tried to attacked me in Zamboanga 2 years ago. So we filed cases to the NBI, to the NPC, to the Commission on Human Rights, and also to the UN. And the UN have sent reports and recommendations to the national government. But of course, it's hard for the national government to do so much in relation with the growing extremism in the south, and also with the fundamentalist group. So there's a lot of challenging on bringing forth the justice. So what I can do for now is just to continue my advocacy through visual video or visual filmmaking and visual campaign as well. And hopefully there will be a lot of LGBT Moro and Moro youth who will become an ally or more vocal on the human rights activism in Mindanao, especially in Bangsamoro, because I feel like it's hard for me to do it alone. It needs to be collective. So that's always the challenge. So I always hope that there will be more people who would want to speak out and do their arts, and it spread more awareness on the advocacies that we are fighting for Mindanao. It's not an easy road, of course, but if you are strongly if you are very strong on that type of advocacy, you will actually go the extra miles. But of course, the safety is always important. So when doing the documentary about your advocacy, you need to make sure that you prioritize your safety, because it's hard to tell a story of a dead man. So
Mm.
when you go to this conflict region, always make sure that you are in coordination with the military, or you go in incognito. making sure that your safety is always a priority. But of course, there are a lot of advocacies that do not involve risk on safety. For example, uh, advocacy on poverty, advocacy on life underwater. Those are the advocacies that, less likely wala kang masasagasaan na extremist people. But when you do human rights and your target is Bangsamoro, that would involve a lot of risk on the safety. So you need to be extra careful, and you need to make sure that you coordinate with the right organization, right institution for you to be able to do those documentaries. For example, with In Paglayag, when I went to Tawi-Tawi and Sulu, even if I already been there many times before, a lot of people already knew about my background. So I need to coordinate with the military for the civilian escort, so those kind of things, just to make sure that I will be able to do my filming without the risk of me getting, amputated or whatsoever with the safety. So those kind of things. But
Okay.
this is not to discourage people to do advocacy. Yeah? There are many advocacies still. So you can still do it. What I'm just saying is that uh, make sure that you do it properly with the right precautions.
Radham not only focuses on on the LGBT na documentary. So he mentioned In Paglayag, no, but this is a different case because you got criticized for involving the Chinese, no, in your story.
Yes, you're thinking of that. But I think some people have misunderstood that. I ca it was it was my purpose to involve that kind of angle because there has been a long tension with the sea dispute with the Chinese government and also the Philippine government. So I decided to include the narrative of the connection of the Sultan of Sulu and also China to send a message that even in 1200s, the
Wait.
Chinese Empire is already giving respect to the Philippines. So I think that was the message I was aiming for. But of course, there are some people who misunderstood the film. So those were the people who called me out on. But I think the call out was good because it has given me the avenue to speak. It has given me the avenue to explain. Because if you get called out and nobody wants to listen on what you have to say, then that's also a problem. So it's good that they called out and they listen to what I have to say. It was a good dialogue for me to further the message of the film as well. Because the documentary about that history of Sulu was just 30 minutes, and you cannot explain the entirety of the history of the Sulu for 30 minutes. So it was more like uh, a part of the history of Sulu. It was not even an entire story of Sulu.
Direk Radem gave us no an overview of his career, of his choices no as a filmmaker, of his advocacies and the challenges no that he faced no by pushing for this particular advocacies. I hope students would be able to appreciate no the work that advocacy filmmakers are doing kasi nga if you're in Metro Manila for example and you're doing your films, you're assured that you can screen your films no even just to your friends or to student competitions, to film festivals. But in this case no, so as Direct Radem has mentioned, uh even the mere screening of his films no in the Bangsamoro region is a very difficult task. What advice now can you give to aspiring filmmakers in general, Derek Radem?
Uh, so this is one thing I've noticed with a lot of younger filmmakers. they are a little bit stressed out because they are really stressing themselves in finding the right story and not realizing that the right story is already beside you. So never be afraid in starting small, starting in your own hometown, finding stories of your neighbor, finding stories of your community or your heritage. There is big and small, and it's really good to start from the topic that you're already aware rather than start from something that you are already 100% hindi pa prepared and not aware of that culture yet. So yun, that would help you evolve into something bigger, and that would help you, that will give you a good exercise to improve and prepare yourself in a bigger picture, in a bigger topic that is not within your home. So yun lang, don't stress yourself. Start somewhere small and just make sure that you give justice to the story that you are telling, especially if that story is not yours, but the story of a certain person or a certain community.
I'd like to ask lang po Radem or our guest on his perspective on filmmakers who aren't from Mindanao but wants to tell a story about it or in it. Since ayun po, most of us here are from Luzon and some are from Visayas, and I'd like to know if ayun nga po, if what's your perspective on these outsiders or us as outsiders directing these stories that centers on Mindanao culture or is placed on Mindanao as a setting.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that question, Ivan. No, that's actually an interesting question because one of my docu-film, Hugo, is a documentary film about the artifacts exploitation in Cordillera, and I am not from Cordillera. And I was actually called out by some people now why I made that film. But I told them like those those information that I echoed on my documentary are information given by the local. I was just only the 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 visual storyteller. I am the echo chamber that helps this local community to echo their sentiments, to echo their knowledge, and to echo what they think about this kind of situation. And I think there's nothing wrong with documenting stories that are not your own, no? As long as, like what I said, always make sure that you do your research, you study, and always communicate with the locals. Make sure that your information are factual, and at the same time your resource person are also telling the truth, or your resource person are or what you call it, are credible. And at the same time, you know what, one special thing that makes a culture, or a culture being filmed evolve into something better is because of the outside perspective, because that will start conversation on what is the perspective. For example, outside of the Bangsamoro, there's perspective about Bangsamoro, because it will give you the opportunity to be able to address this through dialogue and what you have learned. For me, it will be more of an exchange of ideas, because once you travel to, for example, to Bangsamoro and to document the story, you will eventually learn more from the travel. And at the same time, those persons that you meet will also learn from you. So it will be an exchange of lenses. So yun nga, in order to give a dignified documentary about stories that are not your own, make sure that most of these stories coming from the locals or factual. So I think those are the elements that you need to really consider when doing stories that are not your own. So
Mhm.
yun.
And
Thank you po.
we've also been discussing that, no? So with the Binisaya, yun sa cultural appropriation nga and sensitivity in cinema, no? So yung before, no, there were a lot of Tagalog films na portraying Binisaya or Visayans, no, as household helpers, no? Kaya rin namang ang baba, no, ng tingin sa mga kapatid natin, no, na Bisaya. And then when you look at the Muslims in Mindanao, no, they're being portrayed, no, as terrorists, no, in general, no, sa ng Manila, no, na media companies, no. So yun din yung binanggit ni Direk Rhadem, no. So we need to do our research, no. Meron pang additional 2 questions, pero yung isa na sagot
Sige, laban.
yung
Laban Japan.
financials. Parang gusto niya sana na maging na i-pursue rin, no, yung ginagawa mo na maging advocacy filmmaker. Pero ang problem of course ay yung financial, no, yung yun nga parang nasagot na yung kanina, no, how to get grants. And Direk Radem also mentioned na you need to know, no, your particular advocacy, so you would know who to tap, no. So parang in his case mga United Nations, no, na mga organizations and even foreign embassies. Pero meron pang isang question.
Mag-add din ako, Sir Seymour, no? This is also one thing na feeling ko my greatest lapses when I was younger, yung importance ng networking. I mean, not the networking like Uno, ha? I mean, networking like building your connections, building or creating a group of allies, and building relationship with a lot of other people whom you think that could benefit to your advocacy, and you or them can benefit from you. So that's always the essential, because when I was younger, I actually don't care about anybody. So hindi ako nag-build ng connection. I was younger that time. So it was only when I started working in Thailand na nag-build ako ng a lot of connections from international NGOs and embassies. Then when I came back, I built it up, nag-communicate ako with ABS, TV5, and other organizations. So parang if I could have done that when I was way younger, probably I could have done more and do more.
Good afternoon, Direk. Ito po, at this point kasi di ba parang nagiging progressive na rin po tayo as a society and our views on things na which were previously traditionally considered taboo or sinful. But in some parts of the country, may mga uncomfortable or unaccepting or simply tolerant pa din po, especially from older generations, yung mga boomers, tsaka yung mga religious na extremists po. So my question is, what are your hopes for the Filipino Muslim filmmakers and yung mga queer filmmakers din po who are Muslim, and the Muslim community's perception on queerness in the years to come?
I think we should understand some communities still need a process of healing to tolerate and to accept. I think we need to give that kind of elements to them as well, as long as they don't get physical. That's why it's essential to strengthen the human rights policy in Bangsamoro, to make sure that while they are healing and in the process of tolerance and accepting, there will be nobody will be left behind or will be physically harmed. I hope that there will be more and more Moro filmmaker who would do amazing film, talk a story of Bangsamoro, because that is what is lacking. The representation in the film industry in the Philippines, more stories that is more local, more authentic, that is coming from Mindanao. And at the same time, like what I said, na medyo madami pa ring Moro youth ang hindi pa vocal to talk about topics, then try to use any medium of art. But the problem now is that here in Mindanao, going into arts is becoming more of a privilege.
Mm.
I don't know if you notice it, but not everyone here can afford a cheap camera to start filming. Not everyone here can start buying paints to paint. Not everyone here can start buying other form to tell a story. So there are economic issues aside from the cultural issues and aside from the conflict issues as well. So there are many underlying issues that needs to be addressed to empower more morals to be in line with the progress, for example, progress in Visayas or Luzon. So that is essential, and it's hard to talk about peace if everyone are hungry, no?
Mm.
So
Agree.
so those kind of things. I mean, people or Moro would likely go and find way to look where to eat rather than to tell a story. So that needs to be addressed as well here in Bangsamoro. But the new government of Bangsamoro are trying their best. I mean, compared to the previous autonomous region of Mindanao government, the new Bangsamoro now is, I think, just my observation, is doing way better than the previous Islamic government.
Mm.
So hopefully it will continue and the progress will be there so that it will open opportunity to more Moros to be engaged in visual storytelling.
Mhm. So here's to a brighter future, no, for Bangsamoro, no. So from the ARMM that we learned before, no, now it's the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region and Muslim Mindanao. And the Bangsamoro Film Festival, no, is a good step. No, yun nga lang sana hindi magkaroon ng conflict, no, between the contestants and the judges, no. This is a good step, no, in encouraging younger filmmakers, no, to also take on the craft, no, para madagdagan din yung mga filmmakers. And then of course with more filmmakers, meron ka ring mga mag-choose ng path ng advocacy, no, to help then direct Rhadem and the other advocacy filmmakers in Mindanao, no, in pushing for the causes that they espouse in.
Gusto ko lang i-add na parang for example with me, hindi ako full-time documentary filmmaker, no. So I have a creative consultancy job on the side. So I mix two jobs together for me to be able to, kasi it will be difficult to get a film project all the time, constantly, tuloy-tuloy, no? But you need to make sure as well that you get through life and be able to do your script while waiting for that budget or grant. I mean, not to fully, I don't know if I should say this, but not to sort of like evolve yourself in filmmaking alone. We should also learn to juggle things.
Mhm.
If you could do other things on the side, so you would have a two venue for earning or platform, or at least you have a 1 day job and you would have your documentary as a passion thing, on the side. Kasi ang hirap kasi if gagawin mong pang full time
Mhm.
yung documentary and mag-expect na lang ng income mo and to get through life from documentary alone. Kasi the competition in applying and teaching for grant is very extensive as well. Ang daming nag-a-apply, so it's also a make or break. And sometimes some people, they work on a certain day job so they could fund their film, so they don't have to compete on those grants and wait for the chances for them to create their film that they strongly want to produce. My first film na produce ko siya out of my own pocket, no. Then after that, nagka-build na ako ng portfolio. Then that gave me the opportunity to pitch. Kasi hindi ka lang magpipitch eh. Some of these funders, they will also ask what you have done in the past. So you also need to create your certain portfolio as well. So yun.
Tsaka karamihan din naman ng ng documentary filmmakers, no, dahil hindi pa naman sustainable, no, at least in the Philippines, no, yung pagiging documentary filmmaker. And add to that, pagiging advocacy filmmaker, no, meron other jobs, no, whether teaching, being a consultant, or being part of a TV show, no, yung iba sa mga kakilala ko. No, at least it complements, no, parang meron kang mga skills na natututunan from the other job that you can use later on for your advocacy projects.